All right, hello guys, welcome back. So now we're going to talk about the next parameter of the subconscious, or the next property of the subconscious, which is very important. Excuse me, I think this is actually the last one for this chapter. So we're now going to talk about something that I call subconscious frequency. Now, before going into this, I want to basically just give a little bit of a idea of what this is like, right? So I like to compare it to a cable box. And actually, I used to work at a cable company, so maybe that's why I think of it this way. I do talk about it a little differently in the book, but in the video, I'm going to go with the cable box analogy. So, for cable boxes, right? The cable boxes require the coax cable to go in the back of it, which carries the main video signal. That video signal comes through the coax wire. The coax wire goes into the street. Eventually, it goes to I believe it's called the head end, and that's where the main video signal comes from. Now, the video signal coming from the head end all the way into the cable wire has the main signal basically has it has a range of frequencies, different. So it has a combination of a whole bunch of different video signals, and each video signal has a specific frequency. But the main signal just has all of them. So the main signal could basically be a frequency range. If you include all the video signals, then the range of that main signal is probably, like, I don't know what the numbers would be, just making it up. You could say, for example, maybe 100 megahertz to 800 megahertz, right? In that main video signal. Now, when that signal goes into the cable box, what your cable box does is it has a tuner. So it has a frequency tuner. And the tuner will filter out every signal, all of those signals except for one. It's really a range of one, but like the average is really the one that you're looking at. But we'll just assume it's one. So it filters out a range. It filters out every signal but one. Now that one signal, what it ends up doing is it now allows that one signal. It converts it and then allows it to go into your TV, and then your TV displays audio and video. It displays the audio video associated with that signal, right? That one signal will let through, and that's the channel that you're watching and listening to. Every channel, right? So if you want to switch to another channel, what's actually happening in the cable box is the tuner in the cable box then tunes out every other frequency, including the channel that you were turned to, and then it lets in the other frequency, which would be the new channel you turn to. And then that frequency has a unique display and has unique video and audio, right? And so each time you turn to a different channel on the TV, you're going to a different frequency. Every frequency has a unique combination of video and audio. So I just wanted to basically set up that analogy to say that that's very similar to how your subconscious mind operates, right? So your subconscious has a special attribute or parameter that uniquely determines how subconscious energy expresses itself. And that parameter is what I call subconscious frequency. Now, and so you can imagine why I call it frequency, right? Now, to be clear, just for the sort of the hardcore physics people out there, frequency is a term in physics or math that just means per second, right? It doesn't mean anything else except per second. Generally, you're using it to talk about cycles per second. How many times something repeats itself per second. That's not how I'm using it, right? So it has nothing to do with cycles or frequencies or anything like that. Metaphysically, it might, but that's not really, I don't need that for this definition. I like to call it frequency just because it reminds me of how frequencies work when they're in video signals and in colors or on the electromagnetic spectrum, which we're going to talk about. We're going to compare them to colors next. But I just like to call it that because it reminds me of that. Now, but yeah, so what this basically means is that your subconscious basically has a parameter, which when your subconscious, that parameter can take on many different values. So a large range, possibly infinite, it could take on a large number of different values. And every time your subconscious switches, that particular parameter switches to a particular value, now your subconscious expresses itself in a unique way. So the subconscious basically subconscious energy expresses itself in a unique way, but you could also say subconscious thought expresses itself in a unique way, since it always has the energy component with your subconscious mind. So the only type of subconscious thought we talked about so far is emotion. So in other words, emotion, a good example of a subconscious frequency you could talk about in terms of your emotions. So let's say you want to charge the emotion of joy, right? What your subconscious has to do is switch to the subconscious frequency that we would just call joy, because that's the emotion associated. That's what the that's what the expression of emotion feels like on that frequency, right? It feels like joy, so we'll just call it the joy frequency. That's kind of how I'm going to do it for the rest of the curriculum and the book. But yeah, if you want to feel joy, your subconscious, the parameter has to switch to unique frequency such that when the subconscious charges emotion, it feels like joy. Now, the important thing to recognize is that it's unique. So if your subconscious switches to another frequency and it charges on that frequency, it's not going to feel like joy. It's going to be some other emotion associated with that frequency. So let's say I switch to the frequency, I don't know, of gratitude. That's a good frequency, right? It feels good. But it's the emotion I feel on that frequency, or the subconscious thought, or the way it charges on that frequency, or the expression of the charge, isn't going to feel like joy. In other words, your subconscious can't charge the joy emotion on the gratitude frequency. It just won't. It's like tuning a cable or changing the channel on a cable box and trying to watch channel 5 on channel 2. It won't work. It doesn't make sense. That's not how it works. So your subconscious works the exact same way, right? So every time you want your subconscious to do a specific thing, you have to get it to go to a specific frequency in order to do what you want it to do, in order to basically do what you want it to do. So you have to start thinking in terms of frequencies. And I think like that way all the time. You're never going to realistically be able to control your subconscious without thinking about the frequency. It just won't do certain things it won't do what you want it to do unless it's on the right frequency. You have to get it on the right frequency. And for emotion, it's kind of obvious, because if we're just naming frequencies in terms of the emotion that you will feel on that frequency, then it's easy, right? So I know if I'm angry, I'm not going to subtly, magically start feeling joy. You know what I mean? But for the other subconscious thoughts, which we're actually going to talk about, I think, in the next video, because we're going to start chapter 3 in the next video, where we're going to start talking about other types of subconscious thought. But the other types of subconscious thought are less clear, but they follow the exact same rules, right? Every subconscious thought, or every way that the subconscious expresses itself, is always unique according to the frequency. So you have to start thinking in terms of the subconscious frequency. Now, the other thing about frequencies is that frequencies can come in different shades, similar to colors, and they can be mixed like colors. So basically what that means is that a frequency is not a singular parameter, right? So it can be singular, or it could be many, a range of them, which is actually different from a cable box. That's why I compare it in this case to colors, because a color is how do I want to word it? A color is actually what we perceive, what our brain interprets as colors, is actually is the result of electromagnetic signal, or electromagnetic radiation, or electromagnetic wave entering our eye, and then our eye at some point goes to the retina. At some point it converts it into a signal that goes to our brain, and then our brain transmits a signal to our consciousness, and we see a color, right? Now each electromagnetic wave is associated with a different color, or according to the electromagnetic wave's frequency or wavelength, right? I think if it's in a vacuum, then you can just look at the wavelength. I think if it's not in the vacuum, if it's in a vacuum, you can just focus on the frequency. If it's not in the vacuum, I think you have to focus on the wavelength. I could be wrong, but that is my understanding. But anyway, the wavelength of every electromagnetic wave in the visible spectrum is associated with a different color. But you can mix different colors, right? And each color has different shades. So if you take the color red, right, it has a certain range of frequencies. Frequencies such that when we look at it, we would still call it red, even though it's different shades. So you can have like red in terms of scarlet, crimson, ruby. I think there's even the apple red. You know what I mean? But we can see them and we'll say, oh, those are all different shades. But we know that it's still red. It's still that one primary color. And so that's how your subconscious is. So when you're charging subconscious frequency, when you're charging your subconscious, let's say to feel a particular emotion, that emotion can actually have different shades, right? So let's say I want to charge the emotion of joy. Joy, it's funny because I didn't really notice this until I actually started charging emotion. There are actually different shades of the joy emotion. It just is it's like when I feel a certain emotion, I'll say that's joy, but I know it feels different from this other time I felt joy, or this other feeling of joy that I'm charging, but I still know it's joy. I still know it's the same, pretty much that same emotion, but it feels a little different depending on different things I do with my intention. I could feel joy in this way, or I could feel joy in this way, and they feel slightly different. So when you learn how to control your subconscious, you're going to learn how to specify, in a sense, which shade of the emotion you want, right? Now, like I said, other forms of subconscious thought follow that same principle too. But you're going to start learning to recognize your subconscious frequency down to a particular shade that it has. But going back to what I said about mixing colors, you can also mix different frequencies. So for example, I could charge the emotion of joy and love, right? I could feel both emotions at the same time. And in that sense, the subconscious frequency would actually be a mix, because I can't charge any one emotion unless my subconscious is on that frequency. Now, it's not impossible to feel two emotions at once, so that obviously means, if this is correct, your subconscious could be at more than one frequency at once. So now we're going to talk more about that later, but for now, we're going to talk more about what that means in practice later in chapter 7. For now, though, you could basically say that the more your subconscious goes to, the more frequencies it's charging up at, the less intensely you're going to feel any one frequency. So that's the drawback to it. If you choose to charge up at like 10 frequencies or feel 10 emotions at once, you're not going to feel them very much, or you're not going to be able to charge them very easily. They're going to charge extremely slowly. So, and when you chew it with just one frequency, it's going to charge very quickly. So there's a drawback to doing more. So, but yeah, your subconscious can still have multiple frequencies. So at one time. So when you're charging, you're trying to control it. Because of that, what I just said about multiple frequencies, you're generally going to want to keep it to like one frequency. You know, if you do a lot of frequencies, it's like no point. It's not going to do much of anything because there's no energy. You know what I mean? So when I'm controlling it, I usually focus on one frequency at a time. I don't try to feel like a million things at once or do a million things at once with my mind, because I know it's not going to work, right? I have to pick which frequency I want to work with to accomplish what I want, and then I pick that frequency. And that's going to be important later. The last thing, so subconscious frequencies have a polarizing nature to them, which makes some frequencies harder to charge or mix with other frequencies. All negative frequencies are polar, antithetical to positive frequencies. So basically that just means, well, first let me just say that going forward, we're going to use the term positive and negative frequencies. A positive frequency are basically just subconscious frequencies where the emotion associated with that frequency feels good, and the negative frequencies are just subconscious frequencies where the emotion feels bad, right, or doesn't feel as good. I'm going to use the term high frequencies, basically also for positive frequencies. I'm going to use the term low frequencies for negative frequencies. So just to get that out of the way. Now, because of the way your subconscious mind works, the way it's we're going to talk about chapter 7, but the way intention quantizes it, it's very hard to charge positive frequencies and negative frequencies at the same time. So for example, if I want to charge, let's say I want to charge a love emotion while focused on some particular subject, let's say it's a chick, and I want to charge a love emotion, right? It's going to be very hard for me to focus on her and charge the emotion of love, and at the same time stay focused on her and charge the emotion of hate, right? I gotta pick one, right? It's gonna be hard for me to be in love with her. Also, why? It's gonna be hard for me to feel more and more in love with her. at the same time I'm feeling more and more hate for her. That doesn't make sense. You can do it. I remember I actually did something like that just as an experiment to see if my subconscious could do it, and it does. But it doesn't do it very well, right? Which makes sense. It doesn't charge that strongly. It like feels kind of weird. So your subconscious naturally has an affinity for, if you charge more positive emotions, then it has affinity to have an easier time charging other positive emotions. If you charge more negative emotions, it's going to have an affinity to have an easier time charging other negative emotions. So the term, in other words, positive frequencies are polarized to negative frequencies. Now the term I made up in a book, which is a horrible term, but if for whatever reason I just couldn't think of another one at the time, I call them antithetical. So I'll just keep going with that term since that's the term I use in the book. So in other words, positive emotions are antithetical to negative, or positive frequencies are antithetical to negative frequencies. So hate is antithetical to love. Joy is antithetical to anger, right? So anytime and that's why people don't often realize this. The more you charge, or the more you feel an angry emotion, the harder it's going to become to feel a positive emotion. Now I know that kind of sounds obvious the way I say it, but I've seen it. Like a lot of people, they don't recognize that your subconscious has to charge. So they kind of have this attitude where they think they can feel. We haven't really talked about the subconscious memory part. That's kind of where this is coming from. But they have this attitude that they can just kind of walk around feeling pretty negative a lot of the time, but then suddenly feel happy. No, that's not going to work, right? Because then you charge so much negative energy, it's going to weigh down your ability. It's going to weaken your ability to be happy or to charge a lot of positive emotion. You have to let the negative emotion discharge, and then you could charge, and then you have to actually make an effort to charge more positive emotion. Then you're going to be actually happy, right? People constantly think that emotions work instantaneously, like your negative mind, and they don't, right? You may not have noticed that a lot of people often don't notice that they're still holding on to a negative emotional charge or a positive emotional charge. They don't really, because they're not paying attention to it. They don't know what to look for, but it's there. Now, once you get used to charging your subconscious all the time and controlling your frequency, you're going to notice it. You're going to notice things. You can measure it, right? You can't measure it with an instrument, but in your mind, you can just get a sense. It's like you could put a number to it after a while. You know what I mean? Of just how intensely it's charged, how much is discharged. And then you're going to have better control over it. So one thing I actually want to say that I didn't say last video on subconscious charging, which is a little bit important, and it makes more sense in the context of subconscious frequency, is that when you're charging your subconscious, when the subconscious energy grows more and more and more, I say you're going to feel emotion more and more powerfully. Now that requires a slightly large, broader definition, which we're going to talk about in chapter 12, because there's technically two parameters to a subconscious charge in terms of how powerfully you feel it. But for now, we're just going to say that as the energy grows, you're just going to feel the emotion more powerfully, right? And we'll kind of elaborate more on that in chapter 12 because it's going to be important for talking about the subconscious mind. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Do I need to do a recap? That's pretty much it. So yeah, I think in the chapter we talked about subjects, association, subconscious charging, and frequency. So those are the basic properties of the subconscious mind. We're going to talk about all these properties for the rest of the book, right? Everything that you talk about the subconscious in terms of your subconscious mind is based on these principles, right? So it's very important to kind of get a sense of them, get used to thinking in terms of them, because that's really how you control your subconscious mind. Everything you do with the subconscious, anytime you want your subconscious to do anything, it's just like I said, I think in the first chapter, the subconscious, the conscious, the negative mind and the positive mind have to work together. So both minds have to help each other to do what the other mind cannot. And that's how you, unleash your full potential. So you using your negative mind, which has the logic, right? You have to get used to thinking in terms of how your positive mind works. And it works according to these principles. And the most important ones, I would say, from this chapter, are focusing on charging, right? So you have to get used to thinking in terms of charging everything you want your subconscious mind to do. and you have to get used to thinking in terms of frequency. When you charge your subconscious, what it actually does when you charge it is going to be determined by the frequency that it's on. So you have to constantly look at both. And like I said, when the subconscious is quantized, so in the first chapter I said there are different parameters that are associated with quantization in terms of the timing window which your subconscious will be able to do stuff, right? It's determined by how it's quantized. And I actually can just say it now. So the parameters I was talking about was intention, right? So your intention determines, because it responds to your intention determines what it's going to be able to do, and the frequency. Now, that might seem like they're both the same thing, because the intention determines the frequency, but it's a little bit different than that. Because even when it's on a certain frequency, you're still not going to be able to say exactly what it does without looking at the intention. So both of them have unique properties that determine what your subconscious can do. So you have to constantly think in terms of the frequency and charging and the intention in order to control it. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Again, next video we'll start chapter 3, and then in chapter 3 we're going to go over the other subconscious thoughts that you have outside of emotion. All right. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next video.